Good afternoon, everybody. We're gradually filling up. I'll just wait for a minute or two just to let people get settled in. Just watching the countdown. I'm on lucky 13 at the moment, so I'm going to move beyond 13. Oh, there we go, 15. Right, I am going to start. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Roger Green. I'm the Deputy Commercial Director for Sir Robert McAlpine. I've been asked just to put together a few slides, and being commercial, I have now given you death by PowerPoint, but hopefully you won't review it as death. But what I'm going to do is give you a brief oversight as to how the KDP8 NEC contract works, alongside the adaptation around an NEC4. This is really a fairly basic training to give people who aren't practitioners in NEC some basic understanding on how the documents are set up, what are the key parts of each of the contract, and to allow them to get some familiarization. Now, this session is being recorded, so you are going to be able to play it back as I understand it. And also there is going to be slides provided at a later stage, so you'll be able to see the content. So there's a lot of content in these slides, which I don't intend to go through everything, but it's to allow you the chance to review it once I've gone through each of the parts of the contract. Now, this is going to be split down into 4 sections. I'm going to talk about the project, what is KDP8. I'm going to talk about the contract. I'm going to take you through the NEC core clauses, and I'm going to talk to something that's called cost and fee. So those are the elements of payment, how we actually get that. And then I'm going to show you how all these documents flow together to allow you the understanding of what each part plays in the contract that we've got. Obviously, hopefully at the end of this, you are going to have a basic awareness of what we're doing, and certainly my summary slide is just to revisit the key parts that we've gone through. I myself, I am not a subject matter expert by any stretch of the imagination. I would classify myself as a practitioner, so I have to use these contracts most days, and what you'll find is that the clients do a slight adaptation of the standard NECs we go through. We're going to pick up the elements that KDP8 have dealt with, and hopefully give you some alerting to that. So starting from the top, what is the project? Well, the project is the framework, which is the PPP framework, and we have a series of partners there which have won the various lots. So we have 4 PPPs, which are the lot partners, KBR, Jacobs, Morgan Sindall, Dewson, and Sellafield Limited, which is known as the 5th party. So obviously they have a part to play in that organisation. Now, the PPP is an infrastructure delivery model that was mobilised in 2019. So we have been going for some time now. And obviously the purpose of it, as you can see there, was to deal with major project delivery at Sellafield. Now, one of the key parts to this is that the framework is driven by 5 critical success factors. And you can see that you won't be surprised that cost management is one of them. And obviously they're looking for an accuracy in terms of the delivery in the first place, but they're also looking to drive the outturn costs down against the predictability. And you can see there, they're actually talking about double digits. So that's something 10% and greater. So that's quite a large saving that they're looking to get over. Obviously, employment, as everybody will align to, is that you can only make good commitment and get a confidence once you know you've got some good term period to look at. and through that, hopefully, there's then an encouragement to look after the workforce, build up apprenticeship areas, look at the level of the agency staff compared to supply chain, and obviously making sure that those are reduced so that there is more delivery from people, staff that are aligned to contractors rather than agency. The outcome obviously is that if all this goes together, then everybody shares in the success, and I'll talk a little bit later around KPIs and how that share gets put out. Around the output is obviously we're looking to have an involvement from the inception of the contract. So usually contractors are only involved once the design and the contract's been put together. So actually as contractors, we're going to have some involvement in that. And then upskilling the employer and the supply chain. So as you'll see as we go through this, the whole supply chain effectively becomes a core delivery. So how to explain the component parts of that? Sir Robert McAlpine, we won KDP8. There are many key delivery partners, and for us KDP8 means the concrete structures, groundworks and block work. And we will be looking at the delivery of those works in that area. We have a series of key supply chain partners with us in that delivery, and you can see those listed there. And together we will be delivering KDP8. Now, if you're in another KDP, obviously the setup is very similar. So forgive me for a bias in terms of KDP8, but the modeling that I'm talking about here is mirrored in all the areas of all the KDPs. Now that we've got one single framework, the framework then is subject to a series of call-off contracts. And what you can see here is that I've worked an example here just to show you how the multiple parts of that fit together. As a KDP8 contractor, we could be working in BEPS. And again, I'm going to start with the acronyms. I'm hoping that you're experienced in acronyms, but if not, please consult either your contract or the Sellafield site. There's a lot of acronyms on there that can go together, but I'll give you some guidance there. So we could have two types of contract there. We've got two what we call ECI, early contractor involvement contracts, one on BEPS and one on LS1. And then we have an engineering and construction contract, which is an ECC, which is on BEPS 2. And you can see then what I'm showing there is that we've got two supply chain partners set off from the first contract, and I've got two supply chain partners set off on the second contract on the ECC. So essentially we can have a one-to-many relationship. It doesn't just have to be one KDP and one supply chain partner. So the NEC contract is the contract that the client has favoured. NEC is a very popular contract. We're actually using the version of NEC 4. Some major projects are still being delivered under NEC 3, so HS2 is still being delivered under NEC 3, but most contracts now have moved over to NEC 4. And just to show you that it's not just a mindless element behind there, we've got Peter Higgins, who's the chair of the NEC 4 board, and the NEC 4 was brought around to provide a greater stimulus to management, support the new approaches around procurement, and then also to look at increasing the sectors that they were working in. And obviously this NEC 4 contract is being used worldwide, so there's some significant contracts that are being delivered under that. Excuse me. Under this, you see there's an extract from the NEC page there showing you that actually the types of work are either on a works contract, a services contract, or a supply contract. Each of those acronyms we'll deal with as we go through. You can see under the framework contract that we're looking at, we're mainly operating under a services contract under an NEC 4 option E. And then on a works contract under the ECC, we're also working on an option E. But the idea is then, as the time goes on, we get better in terms of proving the accuracy and so on. We can then start looking at perhaps going to an option C contract, which is around the target cost. So these options that I'm talking about are main option contract. They are there to detail, and you can see there's a bit of a diagram at the top there showing you around the risk and the complexity. How that risk moves across is dependent on which of these option clauses the client will pick. And you can see an option E is cost reimbursable, and that's to engender some correlation between the various supply chain that they're actually building together in order to get to something that is usable and practicable in terms of its delivery. So how does that split out? So this is the diagram slightly blown up, and you can see that what we've got here is an exact mirror. So for wherever we are in the KDP part in the supply chain, there's an equivalent contract at the supply chain level. And again, the two parts of that are either the construction part of the contract, which is the engineering construction contract, or it's an ECS, and you can see that it gets adjusted by the phrase subcontract on top of them. But the idea is that these thread through. So wherever you have one clause that's applicable to a KDP partner as a contractor, that same clause is applicable down to the PSC as well. So alignment of the requirements and obligations. I've said to you that there's then a thread that then appears through the contracts in terms of the core clauses and in terms of the standard NEC4. Now, what has happened here is that the PPPs have designed a contract that has been adjusted to take account of the particular requirements of this framework that they're delivering. And there are amendments that have been done, either the colour won't mean so much to you as we go through this, but basically they've even identified the colours that red was done by Sellafield, by the KDP partners, the PPP, sorry, and blue was the NDA. So the NDA shows that where they've amended the standard NEC4 contract. Now the alignment that we've got here is, I've just said there that we'll come particularly straight down on the different types of contracts, but what I want to identify is this amendment in blue, which has been done by the PPP, and there is a requirement there, without reading all the details, but basically they're co-joining everybody in that action. So Sellafield Limited, the lot partners persons, the works contractors, the subcontractors and others, in order that the contract to enable the client and other lot partners to achieve the PPP success factors. So what they're looking at there is not just the single layer between the client and the PPP, but they're looking at the PPP down to the KDP, and the KDP down to the supply chain, and the supply chain down to their supply chain. So effectively, you've got a giant web of delivery partners delivering this entire contract. We've then talked about how this is all aligned, and actually part of the framework includes a subcontract framework that's been put together. So again, you'll be pleased to know that any conditions that you're under as a supply chain partner is exactly the same as the conditions that we're under. The only one in our particular case, and that's in terms of Sir Robert McAlpine under KDP 8, we do have some SRM specific terms, and they are obviously, as you would expect to do, with health and safety. So we have some certain minimum requirements that we also require on top of how we've got some definition around the contract. So it's effectively the way that you work on site beyond what the PPP is requiring as part of the framework. The other area that I'd like to identify is this clause 26, and hopefully you can see it on your screens. It is a bit small, but the contractor, so this is also under the KDP, shall not enter into a subcontract without prior written consent of the project manager as to the identity of the proposed subcontractor, unless it is an approved subcontractor and/or is proposed subcontract terms. So from our point of view, each time we appoint a supply chain partner, we have to get that approved by the PPP. And because we've already got these terms passed down in the contract, apart from our SRM specific terms, they will understand that the entire contract has been procured in light of the same terms that we've got within our contract. So it gives the client confidence that we're all working to the same aims and the same ambitions. So the NEC documentation. So we're now going into how all this fits together. So we've just gone through the form of agreement. So that's the form of agreement at the top. And again, this is an extract from the ECC documentation. So you can see the guidance notes there. So we have the form of contract at the top. And again, so down the right-hand side there, I've tried to give you some sort of brief explanation as to what they are. So with the form of agreement is used to record the agreement between the parties and on the basis of the contract data. So the contract data, well, what's that about? So the contract data identifies the documents that are forming the contract and identified terms, so it's key data. So what we're doing here is we're starting to form the essence of the contract. We've then got the conditions of contract, and you can see that they are made up of multiple parts. So we have core clauses, which we'll go into a bit later on. We have main option clauses, which is what we were referring to earlier, with our option E being the main, but perhaps an option C. We then have the clauses for resolving disputes. So these are around options under W's and so on. We then have a schedule of cost components, which is either a long or a short schedule of components, and we'll go into that in a bit. Contract data part 1 and part 2 we talked about. Part 1 is supplied by the client. Part 2 is filled in by the contractor. We then have the prices, and depending on the type of contract that you're going for, it's either an activity schedule or a bill of quantities. We then have the client scope, which as a contractor is one of the most important things. It is, and I have taken this as a direct quote, it's what the client wants and requires in an unambiguous form. So we'll talk about the ambiguity a bit later on, but it's the scope information. So it specifies the works that are to be done and the requirements. We then have design. If there's any design that's done by the contractor, that's then dealt with there. So there's maybe certain warranties and so on required. And then the site information, again, is describing the site and its surroundings and the conditions that the contractor will find. So it's giving us some insight into what we will expect to find within the area that is bounded by as the site. So just to go back from the top now, so explaining each one of those elements, starting at the framework. I'm not going to go into particular details, but I'm only going to just highlight the parts of this that I think that you would need to understand. The framework, and again, there's two frameworks here. There's a framework which is for the lot partners and the KDPs, and then there's a framework which is the subcontract, so it's the contractors to the subcontractors. Now, this is where we start coming into some terms that you need to get familiar with. So the parties are names the employer, which is also known as the framework lot partners. So think back to the first slide. The key delivery partner, which effectively is a contractor, so we're KDP8, and then you have a strategic supplier. So the strategic supplier is what we're talking about here in terms of the supply chain. The framework lasts until 2039. So again, that first part of that, you've got the longevity of the delivery, So that allows us to get better and get better and get better and try and meet these aspirations that the client's after in terms of getting the predictability on cost and getting the predictability on time. The framework scope is effectively just identifying that whilst there's a framework that's in existence, nothing can be activated until there is actually a call-off contract. And those call-off contracts are what we described earlier between the services and the works. Some key parts to this is around definitions. So again, being commercial, we have to do what it says on the tin. So if the contract says and it's describing something, you need to take particular attention of that. So in Appendix 13, there is something now called corporate overhead percentage. It doesn't refer to it as a corporate overhead. The corporate overhead then comes at a later stage. So it identifies, effectively, it's a new schedule of cost component, and it identifies what parts of the cost have to go into that. We have different templates as we've understood, so either an ECC or a PSC, depending on what type of contract it is. This is then when we come into the benefits of achieving the client's aims. So the lot partners have an AIA, which is an aligned incentives agreement. So they all have a incentive to which will identify particular delivery parts to that contract. Then as a KDP, we would then set up key performance indicators would then support those. And then further down, obviously as a supply chain, we would look to do the same with yourselves, either on a contract type or on some kind of incentivization. So the frameworks are the works or services set out in Appendix 9. So again, this is really important. Scope, what is the scope of the framework? And that identifies what we've got to actually deliver. And then here we come as one of the important parts of this is collaboration, cooperation, and manner of working. So same as I identified to you earlier about all these terms passing down, what we want now is that same passing down in terms of management between the teams. So that the key delivery partner does all things reasonably within its powers, which are necessary to give the effect to the spirit and the intent of this framework agreement. In particular, the key delivery partner shall not act unreasonably or without giving due regard to the representations of others when reaching any decision as to the giving or withholding of consent or approval, or when exercising any other discretion pursuant to this framework agreement or call-off contract. Now, I will be a little bit pointed here. The first thing is to actually, I think I know what that says, but it's not clear to me what it is saying. And I then go back to the NEC introduction, which says the NEC is a suite of standard contracts, each of which has these characteristics. It is clear and simple document using language and a structure which are straightforward and easily understood. Now, that obviously is a statement that's come straight from a solicitor. And so as commercial, the first part of that is we need to break that down and understand what is that's actually trying to say. I think I know what it says. I just need to get that tested so it's clear. So NEC. So the NEC, as they've said, they've tried to make it easy for everybody to understand, and that ease starts with splitting the NEC contract up into nine parts. Each of those are described down there. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these because time's moving on, as it usually does. So each part of these under general are the general conditions that are wanting to be met. So we described earlier who the parties are. You can see here that the parties are the project manager, supervisor, and the client. The contractor has over 80 obligations to complete under this contract, so you need to make sure that you read it and you understand it. The part here, this is where we have this term under 10.3, which is focusing us on the delivery of the entire contract with aligned obligations. And this is now the term or the phrase or the condition that I really want you to understand is 11.1. It is that in these conditions of contract, the terms identified in the contract data are in italics, and defined terms have capital initials. So what that means is anything that's got a capital letter, so you can see there a lot of partners, that has a definition. Anything that's then in italics is referred to in the contract data. So in this contract, you should find a definition that goes behind anything that's capitalized, and anything that's italicized goes into the contract data. And again, that's a simple way of trying to understand what the contract's requiring. If you go to the contract data, you'll find all those elements in there. Right, so contractors' main responsibilities. Again, picking up in here, to provide the works. The standard clause has been amended to add in there regularly and diligently. The scope is the information that specifies and describes the work. It also describes the constraints. So you then need to understand in the contract data part 2 what is actually in there. 3 is time. So this is all about the program. Again, there's some phraseologies that need to be picked up in here. So they talk about business days, and you've got a business day there, which is defined as a Saturday, is a day which is not a Saturday and a Sunday or a public holiday. So that is actually a business day. So capital B and a capital D. And then project documents, you can see up here, it's talking about all project documents. So again, project documents is a defined term at 136. Which means all drawings, etc. So in terms of time, what is the important thing? Well, the important thing is around the completion date, and the completion is actually described as well. So they give you a date and they describe the services that are to be done as part of it. Quality management, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. You basically have to have a quality management system to ISO 9001. But the quality then also picks up defects under clauses 44, 46 and 47, and that has been heavily amended to the nuclear standards. Payment, obviously another key part of this, is that what we're saying is we have to submit applications for payment. Those application payments effectively trigger the process for the payment. And assessing the amount due under clause 50 is telling us how we actually submit that information, and it has to be done 15 days before the application date. Another part to this is 50.3 is what I want to pick up here is that there's a phrase in there called the price for work done to date. And you can see that's all capitalized, and then under 31, which is 11.231, the price of work done to date is the total defined cost. That in itself has a capitalization, so you have to understand what defined cost is, and we'll pick that up in a bit. But we're now picking up some new terms because they're in blue, plus nominal profit, plus incentivized profit. And I'll come on to that again in a minute. I think I'm supposed to be nearly finished now. Just checking back on time here. Clearly I am supposed to be nearly finished, I'm way out. Compensation events. Again, it deals with what can be changed. So as we go through this, there are changes that are allowed under the contract. Each of those are defined under 60.1. It'll tell you what compensation events you can apply for. And what you also need to remember, though, is what are your responsibilities in order to get those compensation events registered and agreed. So you don't just register them, you do have to do stuff with it. Title, liabilities, insurance and termination. Hopefully we won't have to worry too much about those, because if we get to termination, then that is when the solicitors will take over. Schedule of cost components. This is in the old days what we used to call a 5-column split. Actually, now that's a 9-column split, and those are people, equipment, plant and materials, subcontractors, charges, manufacturing and fabrication, design, insurance, and a new one called corporate overhead. Now, there is no definition for corporate overhead, but there is a definition or a requirement that's given under the contract clause 58, which identifies all the items that have to appear within the corporate overhead. So corporate overhead, nominal profit, incentivized profit, defined cost is what we talked about earlier. So here's this defined cost definition coming in, and it's the cost of the component of the scheduled cost of components less disallowed cost. So disallowed cost is identified and what it's actually called. Here is the standard definition on the NEC, and here is the new definition, and you can see here's this blue again. So they're now including it as nominal profit, because effectively they've taken the fee, which is the standard that's known under the NEC, and they've split it out into a corporate overhead percentage, a nominal profit, and an incentivized profit. What they'll pay as a standard is the corporate overhead percentage and the nominal profit. The incentivized profit has to come through if you achieve your KPIs. What are the KPIs? The KPIs are 3 KPIs that we have as key delivery partners that we will then be passing down. If you remember earlier, we talked about the PPPs. They have an aligned incentive agreement, and each one of these, so we have 3. One is at an enterprise level, one is a project objective specific, and the other one then is partnering trade. So where we are then partnering against another KDP, we have an incentivization around that. In terms of supply chain, obviously we expect the supply chain to support us in all that, and the type of contract that we go for, or the way we do the incentivization, or the way we do the payment itself, it will all be linked back into those KPIs. So I'm going to skip through that, and I'm going to go through to an order of precedence. Once you get into your awareness, you'll understand that actually there's different parts of here in terms of the order of precedence. There isn't an order of precedence in NEC, but actually in the framework agreement, it will actually identify how you view each of those documents and the order in which you actually view them. But if there's any conflicts, it talks about how you deal with the conflicts. Now, just beyond the contract, there is then this area that we talked about, which is in the scope information. You can see the scope information here. I'm just giving you an example. These are many areas that have the specification requirements, the constraints and the requirements in terms of how you're going to deliver the works. What I suggest is you find somebody in your organization, and that could be fairly limited in terms of your size, who actually then understands exactly what's required in each of these, and you can gain that knowledge from each other's experience. Acronyms, as you know, there's loads of them, so just be aware of them. Where can you get further training from? So the first thing is you need to be aware of what amendment the NEC contract's under, and actually you can see that there's amendments go all the way up to 2023, so that does affect the way the contract actually works. I've left you links on here that you can go and have a look at. There are plenty of practice notes in here directly under the NEC. There's some free courses under built intelligence, and they are really good courses. So hopefully overall, and I'm sorry that I'm over time and you might have all gone, but basically the awareness that I've just gone through very quickly in the last minute is that we have each KDPs. Those KDPs are all linked by critical success factors. That comes through the framework. The framework then spills into call-off orders. Those call-off orders are either early contractor involvement or construction contracts. The NEC contract then is split down into those various parts. The key part of all this is, and I know that the client will want me to say this, is what we're doing is we're acting as an extension. We are all acting together as one organisation to deliver this contract. So it's really important that you then also pass these terms down to any of your supply chain as well, And hopefully with that, we will all get some success and we will deliver this contract for quite a few years yet to come. Thank you very much.